Good morning. It is 7:01 a.m. on Friday, April 12th, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. This week has just kind of flown by for me. It feels like it has just gone really fast for whatever reason. But, I guess that's a good thing. It's interesting actually just to question whether or not like the subjective experience of something is good or bad. I don't know. Anyway, what I thought I wanted to talk about today, and that I will talk about today, is the new Twilight Zone series, which actually has 3 episodes out now. And I have watched all 3, and I'm a fan. I really like it so far. So I'm going to talk just briefly about each episode in this discussion. I will try to avoid, like spoilers, so to speak, of what happens in each one, other than the basic premise. But just in terms of kind of reviewing it, I suppose, I'll certainly be talking about my impressions. It's good tea. So the first episode is, I feel like, maybe my least favorite of the 3, which isn't to say that I didn't like it. And especially, I like a lot about it. I'm a big fan of Kumail Nanjiani. I like him a lot. And so I think if anything feels weird about it, it's really actually just seeing him play a bad stand-up. That feels weird because he's actually very good. And so the premise of that episode, hello. I'm talking about the new Twilight Zone. So the premise of that first episode, we have Kumail Nanjiani, and what we're shown is that he is a stand-up who gets regular spots at a club, and he's clearly been doing this for a while in the sense that he knows a few people, but he's not succeeding. The joke that we see him tell is this torturous Second Amendment bit about, it's like, oh, well, people don't want regulations, but the words say well regulated, which, is like, it's true, but it's not funny exactly. And we really see him digging in, despite the fact that just no one is engaging with the joke. And we see him struggling. And so that sets up the conflict right away, this idea that he wants to succeed as a stand-up by not just, doing hacky observational, humor. And so he is wanting to make a difference in the world. And so he ends up meeting in this club a famous comedian who he is told, we're told through the dialogue that this famous comedian was uber successful and then just kind of disappeared out of the public eye. It's like, you had it all, what happened, right? And so we see this other character acting ominously, but it makes the classic sort of Twilight Zone deal, right? Where this idea tells him about all you have, if you really want to succeed in stand-up comedy, what you have to do is take things from your life and put them in your act. But be careful, because when you put something in your act and you put it out there in the world, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to them. And so this implication is that, that's kind of a metaphorical thing about how you can sort of lose control of your own creative output, which I think is an interesting, sort of meta conversation. But in the context of the story, what happens is he finds that he starts having success and making people laugh when he starts talking about things in his life. But after his set finishes, he realizes that that thing that he put in his act is now gone. Like, he talks about his dog, and then now his dog is gone. And not just gone, but never existed. And so of course, the primary dilemma becomes this question of, like, he's so desperate for success and validation as a stand-up, but what is he willing to put in there in his act and be willing to give up? And can that system be gamed? Like, can he start talking about his high school bully, bad people in the world? Like, and so I won't say, spoil how everything goes in the end, but I thought it was really interesting metaphorically, even if it's not necessarily the most thrilling of the 3 episodes so far. Episode 2 features Adam Scott in a parallel, take on the classic Twilight Zone episode of the one where William Shatner sees a monster on the wing of the airplane, but nobody believes him, that sort of thing. And so it's not telling that story, but it tells a story with many parallel themes, where we have Adam Scott introduced as a investigative reporter. We hear him on a phone call to his girlfriend where there's indication that he has perhaps some kind of PTSD that he's not perhaps managing very well, and that maybe this trip he's going on is not a great idea, but he's going anyway. And he finds, as he's boarding this plane for this long trip, he finds this weird, like, old school iPod, except that it's not even like any iPod that was actually made. It's more like a pocket transistor radio with an iPod screen on it. And so when he pulls it up, it's got a podcast loaded. And the podcast appears to be one of these sort of real life mystery podcasts that is telling the story about how the plane that this character is on mysteriously disappeared. And so he's trying to figure out how can this be? And also, if possible, can he prevent the plane from disappearing in the way that the podcast describes? And so I certainly related to that episode on a basis of having just experienced some international airline travel. And just his paranoia of, trying to, figure out how to handle everything is interesting, because he's not sure, where the problem is coming from. And the podcast keeps, because it's framed in this idea of, we don't know what happened. Perhaps it was this. Perhaps it was this. Perhaps it was this. And that is what leads him to try these various different things. And I was, thrilled, pulled along with every turn of the story. But I think actually my favorite of the 3 is the newest one, which has a woman who is taking her son to college for, his first week at college. And she brings along her dad's old camcorder, which is one of those old chunky, it doesn't look quite big enough to be the full VHS size, but it's, it's pretty big. It's like this size. And she has brought that along because it's got sentimental value, and she wants to document her son going off to college. But what she discovers is that when she presses rewind on the camcorder, it rewinds time. And this is actually, it's kind of a parallel to an old classic episode where someone finds a camera that when you take a picture of like a place, it shows that place at actually a different time. And so there's kind of an interesting parallel there. But for her, it she, so what she captures first is her son goes to put ketchup on his fries and it actually squirts onto his shirt. And he's like, oh no, hey, rewind that and tape over it. And that's where she rewinds it. And then suddenly he has not yet squirted the ketchup out. And so that's how she, discovers this power. But to go along with any new mysterious supernatural power, we have to have a threat. And the threat in this context is in the form of a police officer. Now, it's important that this mother and her son are African American. And so it's very clear that this is can be kind of a commentary on the idea of the abuse of power, and especially disproportionately against African Americans and that sort of thing. That's, it's not subtle that that's what's going on in this story. And so what she finds is that as she tries to take her son to college, this one police officer keeps pulling them over and it keeps veering towards disaster. And she keeps rewinding it before it can go as bad as it could get. And she keeps trying to have them go some other way. But this is like a little bit like, Groundhog Day or Russian Dolls, in the sense that there's this reset every time. But she's trying to find a way to avoid this cop interfering with them and just can't seem to do anything right to stop this from happening. And it becomes terrifying. That, it is a very powerful episode, and I really liked it. So I'm a big fan of the new Twilight Zone so far. I liked all 3 episodes. But like I said, even though I like the first one, it's kind of heady in concept, that idea of putting your creative output out in the world and realizing what that can do, both to losing control of it in the public sphere and also how it can change your own experience of it in your life. That's not necessarily going to be as compelling for everybody. So I think if you didn't necessarily care for that one, I would still recommend you try the later episodes, even though I still like that first one. So anyway, I'll leave it there, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes. If I can make my mouse wake up so that I can end the video. Yay!